Hey class, welcome to what we call week 2 overview of communication technologies. As you can see, my microphone is slowly creeping its way up to me. We're getting a little bit of feedback, but we're going to figure that out. So this is the first week of actual content, and I apologize for the thunderstorms outside. But I thought it would be a good introduction to the way that we talk about communication technologies, really, as the Westerman book talks about, what is mediated communication. And from there, sort of build off of what the Yazur and Southwell article said and how we're going to move forward with this. Most of the content that we cover this week is relatively straightforward. It helps us build the foundation. And one of the dilemmas that we face as we're talking about communication technologies are identifying what makes a communication technology new, right? And so we can get into these issues where it might be potentially problematic to start calling every communication technology new. Twitter, Instagram, oh, cool, new communication technologies. Oftentimes, though, what we see is that there are so many similarities between the old and the new communication technologies that sometimes we're doing disservices to the communication technologies. And at the pace and the rate at which communication technologies are evolving and even being created, another dilemma we face is that a new communication technology today will soon be an old communication technology in a couple years, maybe even weeks. Right. So think about Facebook, for instance. Facebook, great example of what we would constitute as an old communication technology. Whereas if you went maybe 10, 15 years back, the notion that we could have our friends, have a timeline, have Messenger, have all these communication technologies integrated into one package, thank you, Zuckerberg, would be just mind blowing. We would have no idea what to do. So, thinking about it from that perspective, we might have some problems. Another issue that we usually run into is that we start to grow attached and really complacent with the way that we use communication technologies. We have this new creative, it's super innovative technology like Skype. And what happens is people start using Skype anticipating the same outcomes as maybe a face to face interaction. Now we know that mediated communication isn't perfect. And so as a result of that, what we need to start figuring out is, do they provide the same cues? Is the richness of the communication technology there? And if it is, great. And if it isn't, well, maybe we shouldn't fall into that rule of the hammer and start using Skype for every face to face interaction. When we have the accessibility to make things face to face, maybe we shouldn't use mediated communication. But at the same time, we shouldn't dismiss that idea. Oh, we can't meet face to face. We won't have the same rewards of this exchange. Well, maybe that's just a disservice to the communication technologies that we have. Now, as we go through, and I've got my notes in the background, so if you see me looking away, I'm just referencing those. As we go through, let's say, the Yazur and Southwell article, we talk about communication theories as they pertain to communication technologies. And we talk a lot about these basic human tendencies, the way that people use communication in general. Now, the way that we use communication should be driven and guided by what we want to accomplish. If I want to send a short, sweet message, maybe a text is a way, it facilitates the message in a positive way. But in a lot of situations, what happens is that new media ultimately alters human dynamics by creating new problems or eliminating old ones. So, as we're talking about new media, the issue that we face in a lot of these circumstances is, how do we really talk about new media in a way that is conducive to helping develop it, right? So we see GChat, something that a lot of businesses have adopted, and we also see it on, let's say, mobile devices. I can talk to my wife, I can talk to some of my previous colleagues on GChat that is both integrated in a cell phone package. It's also integrated into, let's say, a Chromebook within the actual design of Gmail itself. But as we're talking about this, what we're thinking about is this idea that maybe it isn't a good thing that we're using a lot of communication technologies, right? Maybe, just maybe, there is evidence that both encourages connection with other people. We're always connected. I could talk to my mom, who's currently in Greece, via text message because she has Wi-Fi on a data plan that she purchased in the United States to use it overseas in Europe, which is mind-blowing. I FaceTimed her while she was at the beach in Greece, and I was in Chicago walking around coming back from the gym, okay? Mind-blowing technologies. But there is the potential for what we constitute as social isolation. So people are going around talking about how these communication technologies are fixing all of the woes that we have in life. It's so great that we're able to use these communication technologies. However, as we're talking about this, we need to identify that maybe because I have the access to people and information, I don't actually need to interact with them. Right. So I can go on Facebook, I can passively sort of scroll through these pages, maybe interactively message someone, or I can live in isolation, right? And so as we're talking about communication technologies, we're talking about everything, right? The new and the old debate. We're talking about cell phones. We're talking about instant messengers, letters. I talked about this in a graduate seminar before. Smoke signals, going all the way back. It's a technology that enables us to communicate well. The interesting thing about the way that we are using the internet and we're using mediated communication is that over time it's becoming much more personalized. We talk about message personalization. We're making sure that every message is catered to someone's distinct interests, their history, the relational network. We have a way to make everything personal. Think again back to Facebook. How you can actually, if you're an organization, you could purchase ad space and make it a targeted campaign. Well, if I am a company that has a large demographic, I have 18 to 35 male and female from all sorts of racial backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, different interests. Some of them like rap, some of them like basketball, some of them like both. I can actually cater my message to different types of people. And so what happens is that it becomes less mass communication because the personalization and the interpersonal content is really specific. And we refer to this as this idea of demassification. The media is becoming less media. It's not, and this still exists, but it's not as though putting a billboard outside on the highway. That is mass media, right? We're putting a message, we're trying to communicate something to a large audience. We're not really making it specific to Steve, who is an accountant, who comes from a upper middle class family, who now lives in Austin, Texas, right? But instead we're sending it to a mass amount of people. With this message personalization, it actually gets to you in time, and so we're becoming very fragmented. And in a lot of these situations, we actually have to rely on each other. Because what happens is with the internet, with mediated communication, we start to sit there and identify, my network of friends and family is slowly changing and evolving. And oftentimes what happens is the SEO, the search engine optimization, starts to tell us what we should be looking at before we actually get to that point. An example, I'm terrified of scary movies, but I'm also a glutton for punishment on myself. And so a couple of friends and I were talking online on Skype actually, and we go, what are the scariest movies that we've never seen? Not that we intended to watch them, but we started to Google, for instance, what are some scary movies? And we got some absolutely terrifying images. Just awful. I would not recommend it. Don't do this at home. Later, I went to YouTube. And YouTube has always been catered to my subscriptions, the type of videos that I watch. But slowly, I started to see changes in the videos that were recommended. Top 20 horror films, a lot of clickbait, right? Top 20 horror films that you didn't know about. 100 jump scares in common movies. All of a sudden, the messages that were being communicated to me within a mediated context started to change and shift based on what they thought was appropriate to me. So we get into this idea of trust your neighbor principle, that the internet really only works to the extent at which users are willing and able to make it work. And so what we see is that we need to rely on other people to make all of this mediated context happen. So yes, we are having this demassification of information and content. We're also having this mass personalization, okay? So we have new communication technologies. We have old communication technologies. We're oftentimes using them in tandem. Some people can't fathom that people are making phone calls to their significant others. Why would you make a phone call when you could text? Well, there are different preferences, and based on those preferences, help to dictate what our basic human tendencies really allow for us. So as we're going through this chapter and as we're having these discussions, almost knocked the mic. Think about the way that you actually use communication technologies. And again, as we're going through the discussion sections, and I'm pulling it up right now, we have a series. Wrong window. We have a series of information and content, general questions that you might end up asking yourself as to how is it that I'm using communication technologies and what is it moving forward that is most important, right? And oftentimes what we'll find is that people will go ahead and talk about the way that they use communication technologies based on the overview, based on what the understanding is. So again, this is just a quick introduction to what we're talking about in week 2, overview of communication technologies. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. I trust that a lot of you will have really interesting ideas, as I do myself. I try to withhold a lot of my personal beliefs so that it is as objective as possible when everyone starts these dialogues. But again, try to look a little bit inside. What is it that I am looking for? What satisfies me when I'm using communication technologies? How do I use this with my significant other, my brother or sister, my close friend, my maybe coworker? And as you're going through this list, start to think about how is it that I should be using it compared to how is it that I am using it, and what are the nuances, what are the decisions that are being made, maybe consciously or subconsciously, maybe based on some of that mass media, and maybe even some of the different ways that messages are now being personalized, customized to you.